So this is Brett Simus, and I will open the Board of Selectmen meeting for today, October 25th at 7 p.m. On the agenda, we have the Warren or the Grove Street Bridge budget review. So I think, Dennis, you're going to walk us through this. We saw the memo that Joe had sent over. We saw the budget in the meeting packet. So I don't know if you want to walk us through it a little bit, and then we'll
I
go
was
from
going
there.
to, Joe put the memo together, which I thought was excellent. So I was going to let the boss go through the memo and talk about some of the things that we came up with and funding sources, and at the very end, a rainbow, I hope.
Always nice.
I love
when
it.
You
Sounds good. Thanks.
always nice, as long as there's a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow to find. So as you all know, Dennis has been working a while on the replacement of Grove Street Bridge, and most recently, town meeting authorized up to $400,000 for design work, which was approved. However, there was a comment during town meeting that basically had asked about how we basically procure services and all that. So as very often we do, we'll shop around, get quotes from other engineering firms to refine the cost, and Dennis and working with engineers was able to get a quote on the design work from Weston Sampson that was a good deal under the $400,000. So they've been working since the board approved the contract for design services, and specifically they knew the time crunch we were under because of town meeting, and pulled together, after conversations with Dennis and myself, cost estimate where the project is expected to cost $1,330,000. There is a good size contingency in that, so it is a conservative estimate, 30% on each phase of the project. So that's a lower number than what when Dennis was meeting with the board. We always like to under promise, over deliver, and this estimate is coming in below some of the numbers that we had originally talked to the board about. But this is only one piece of it, and I'm going to screen share for a second so that you can, and everyone can see the table that we also have. So hold on for a sec. Okay. And let's see here. There we go. Okay, can everyone see that table?
Yeah.
Yep, we can see it.
So the bridge is broken up into a number of parts. And specifically the bridge, there's, as people may recall from Dennis's presentation, a footbridge component, pedestrian accommodation that would be a separate surface. So it's not a sidewalk that is directly adjacent to the paved travelway of the bridge. You also have water main work and sewer line work that would be part of the project. Because of where this bridge would end and where the Route 140 traffic improvements would pick up, there's a section of sidewalk that we need to extend to make sure that we unify things. And then there's construction engineering that's involved in finalizing the documents, and also as you go through and bid the project, there's some remaining engineering gets done. So that brings you the $1.33 million. When we last talked, we talked about how MassDOT has a municipal small bridge grant program. That is a $500,000 grant, but it's reimbursable. So we don't get it up front. It is something that we reimburse on completion of the project. So that's one additional potential funding source. We do have leftover funds from that Article 17 from the annual town meeting back in May. That could be used towards this project. And then we have the American Recovery Act, ARPA, that you can use for infrastructure works, water, sewer. You can use it for other things right here. We just have it sort of plugged into here for the water and sewer line work, 45 and then 40,000. So that this $1.33 million project, the municipal portion of that project could just be $645,000. We are working with town council to look at whether or not some of the other provisions, such as the footbridge, might be able to be an eligible project under ARPA. But that's something that we don't have to decide right now, because ultimately special town meeting needs to authorize the 1.3, and then we can pull together the other funding sources, as needed, either with the grant or later on during the year, later on this fall into the early winter. The Board of Selectmen will be discussing with not only Dennis, but also Kenny Costa, our finance director, and myself, pulling together a plan for the use of those ARPA funds. So that's something that right now is just a recommendation, but we could utilize some additional funding to further reduce that $645,000 total cost to the town. There's a huge asterisk associated with this, though, and that is basically timing. And I'm gonna just stop sharing for a second. This is all contingent on basically us being in the driver's seat, town meeting authorizing the project, and Weston Sampson is, they've started work. They're starting to do the necessary engineering and survey work. And in talking to Dennis, they're able to, they also know the date of this small bridge grant cycle. So, we're confident that we're going to be able to get things ready for that grant cycle. And that basically allows us to go out to bid in the April to May timeframe and start, early summer, late spring on that project. If town meeting was like, we'd like to see the plans before authorizing and the expenditure, that basically kicks the can down the road a little bit. First thing is, we all know what's been happening with costs for the last year, that even a delay of 6 months to a year can result in significant cost increases. So, that's a concern that we'd have. The second thing is, as Dennis had relayed not only to the board, but also to town meeting, this bridge is being actively monitored by the state. Right now, we're demonstrating to the state that we're proactive in doing the engineering and planning for the replacement, but that could change if we wait until annual town meeting, and we could run into the situation where the state says, safety of the bridge is a concern of theirs, and that it gets shut down. That then, would have an impact not only on emergency response times, but also a business that is directly on the other side of that bridge. And second thing is that then kicks off the calendar, because by the time you get your funding to go out to bid, all the towns that would have been coming out with bridge projects have basically got them out on the street. So, and Dennis had, I believe it was the last meeting, saying, that what ends up happening is towns will delay going out to bid, because if they try to push it, responses could come in really high because they're like, hey, we're already built, we're already occupied for the whole year, but hey, if we got a little extra money, it's just sort of some gravy on their mashed potatoes, and it's sort of a win for them, but it's a loss for us. So then we, could push the project out so that we're bidding out over the winter. But again, costs can escalate, and that's just more time then that bridge is closed. So the last part is that the grant program, once we get approval for the grant, we have 12 months to utilize those funds. Because it's reimbursement, we could run the risk of going past those 12 months and requiring a extension, which the state doesn't necessarily have to give. And my understanding is that for a recent project they did grant, but they didn't do it willingly, that there was some pushback. So that's a concern. And if they push back on, it was Fowler, right, Dennis?
Correct.
So if they push back on Fowler, they say, hey, this is a second bridge project that you're asking for extensions. We don't do this. That's a risk that we'd have to be okay taking. And that $645,000, that amount that the town could be responsible for, that could increase a fair amount. It's hard to predict, but all else being the same on that chart, either we're taking additional money from other projects. We can only use ARPA for those specific uses. We can't throw an additional money that then goes towards, say, the bridge itself. It has to be for identified and eligible infrastructure. So it's not something that can be viewed as, well, let's just take more out of ARPA to defray the costs. So that's sort of where we are. I know Steve in our last meeting had said, would really like to have things more designed, more closer. Unfortunately, sometimes time is what it is. And the fortunate thing is we are in a great position to get everything taken care of and to really be in the driver's seat for this project. And that's going to be something we have to relay to town meeting next week. So, Dennis, is there anything that I missed?
No, that was excellent. The only thing I would like to rehash is just to go back to the time frame, the scheduling a little bit, because it really is crucial. So Weston and Sampson is actively working on getting us to the 25% design stage. They're hopeful to get us there right after the holidays. So come January, Mr. Chairman, we're hoping to come in front of the board with a 25% design stage. And now you can start looking at what their design bridge is, and we can start talking about the aesthetics of the bridge and how it meets the concept that we have, or the vision that we have for downtown. After that, it'll take them about another 2 months to finish the design and the permitting. So we're looking at about March. We have a completed design, ready to go, shovel-ready design. April, the very beginning of April, is our deadline for the grant. So we would have to have that submitted in before April 1st. And then we would want to have the bids go out immediately. And we would want to have the bid awarded and the shovel in the ground probably May. And that's what we're looking at. Once we get approval for the grant, we have, if it goes, unless they change the rules, they haven't kicked this year's out, but last year was, once you get approval, you have 12 months. And if you don't expend $500,000 and go for the reimbursement in that 12 months, you have to do what we did with Fowler. We ran into some delays with Chapter 91 permitting, which we will not have on this bridge, fortunately. And it cost us an extra 7 or 8 months. It took a lot of convincing to get the state to give us that extra time. And they don't have to. And there's nothing in writing or in our current contract that says they would have to do that. So it's a risk, which is why I think it's important that we not push this off to a spring town meeting, that we have this at the fall town meeting, so that before we even make it through the spring town meeting, that project is already beginning. And that's the key to keeping it on track.
Great. That's great. I appreciate the update from both of you. It's obviously been a tremendous amount of work, and you've gotten a lot of information over the past couple of weeks in terms of the detail. So obviously a hard push by some of our partners, as well as the two of you, to get all this put together and come up with all those financing alternatives that can help offset some of the costs. So that's all great. And, I know Steve's not here, but I also know that, he understood the situation we were in, right? He sort of said, hey, we're in a pickle here. And we are, but you've worked very hard to get all of the information that I would expect he would have been looking for, short of the design. But I think that, to your point, you can only work with what you've got. So having a design by the end of the year is great. So thank you for that, Maureen. From your perspective, are there, questions or any information that you're looking for? I do have a question.
I do want to see this go forward personally. I don't want to push it out because I don't want the state to dictate how we're going to build the bridge. And it's a safety issue. That should be first and foremost, to take care of the safety issues.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's also, obviously we've got small businesses in the area. We have residents that live there. There's going to be a tremendous amount of inconvenience, even in the best of circumstances, just with the construction of the bridge. Never mind if the state had to close the bridge because we have delayed their guidance or adhering to their guidance on replacing the bridge. So that would be very problematic, certainly from my perspective. So I agree with you. One question I do have, and I don't know if this may be for the presentation for special town meeting. It may be for now, depending upon how we want to share it. But of the ARPA money and the state grant, right? Like, the state grant, I feel like it's pretty. It's more of a process than it is a grant of, hey, they only award it to 3 people, right? It's pretty standard fare that you'd get that grant, right?
It is.
Okay.
We don't have.
And then
you're talking about the 500,000, Mr. Chair.
The 500,000, exactly. Yeah.
Speaking with our consultants today, they have no reason to believe we would be unsuccessful.
Yeah, perfect. And then the other piece is the ARPA reimbursements. How certain is it that what we're doing would qualify for those? Is that money that's allocated and it just sort of is a pot we need to go into? Is there some justification, or how certain are we that we would be able to access those funds?
So regarding ARPA, and this is going to be a discussion that we're going to have at a follow-up meeting later on, either in November, December, or early January, for how we want to use those ARPA funds. We have a lot of flexibility. The Board of Selectmen has a lot of flexibility as far as identifying how it wants to use those funds. Water and sewer are absolutely eligible infrastructure improvements that can utilize ARPA. Same thing with pedestrian accommodations, and that's where the sidewalks. I don't have it proposed, but we could conceivably, if the board decided, we could throw additional money at it. We can't exceed the amount of the cost for any of those one items. So we can't say, well, let's just throw $100,000 out of ARPA and we're only using water and sewer, because those didn't come out to 100,000. So we do have to keep it in line with eligible projects, but those things are eligible under ARPA. It's going to be a balancing act for the board. There may be additional water and sewer infrastructure that we may want to use those funds for, and that's part of what we'll be pulling together for the board, to use 85 to 100,000 out of 2.4 million that we're getting in ARPA. That's really not much, but it has a big impact for this project.
Sure, no, absolutely, and that's what I was after. So I notice Gene has his hand up, but before we go to Gene, our friends from the Finance Committee are here. So, Paul, is there anything you'd want to add, or any questions that you have for Joe or Dennis?
No, Brett, but with respect to keeping the road or keeping the bridge going, you still have to remember that that's a major thoroughfare for commuter traffic, and you have school buses that go down there. So should the eventuality come that road, the state shut that down, that other traffic has to find other ways to get through. So, you're going to impact other roads and things like that. But no, I've had this couple of conversations offline with Dennis, and this presentation here, I think, spells it out, very succinctly. And you still
Awesome.
have the issues of the price, price changes and things like that, which I've seen firsthand with respect to the community center project. But it's something that has to be done, and the longer you put it off, the more expensive it gets. So that's my 2 cents on it. And the finance committee we're posted for tomorrow night to talk about these.
Okay, great. Rick, anything from your perspective?
I just wanted to emphasize one point, which I believe, Brett, you had brought up in one of the earlier meetings, and that is concerning the walkway and the overall appearance of this bridge. Hopefully, since it's in the historic section and it's going to be a showpiece because of the traffic down there, people walking, etc., we're hoping that it ends up with some artistic flair to it as opposed to just some Jersey barriers on the edges. So that's just my comment.
Thank you very much.
Just to follow up with what Brett had brought up earlier.
Great. I see Dennis smiling. I think he's got the message. Mr. Burnett, thank you very much for your patience. Welcome. And what's your take?
No trouble at all. Great presentation on everybody's part. One of the thoughts that I had, I think you're aware of the various different warehouse proposals that are being developed around the town, particularly down at the Hopedale and Upton town line, and traffic that could be entering onto Mendon Street, heavy truck traffic from that project, as well as 140, as well as Kimball's truck. Have we thought at all about posting this bridge and trying to restrict the weight limit on Glenview Street? I mean, it's on Grove Street. It just seems that we're getting more and more heavy truck traffic through the center of town using residential roads. Then when they cross the center, they go directly across the street by the church and then hook again through residential roads that aren't really equipped to handle the size of the trucks that are being trafficked along that way. So one of the questions I have is, and I think it'll be helpful at town meeting too, is if we can present some sort of proposal to at least try to mitigate the heavy truck traffic, which is also a big part of the wear and tear on that bridge. I think Dennis can probably attest to the fact that a truck is not like 2 cars. A truck is like several hundred cars in terms of wear and tear on infrastructure. So just curious as to the Selectmen's take on that, Dennis's take on that, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think that there are, and I believe the Economic Development Committee is working on this, plans to determine how best to, and if we can, try to mitigate any risk of having excess infrastructure impacts from business projects or commercial developments that may be going into town, whether that's one-way roads, weight limits on bridges, other types of traffic restrictions and controls. And I think that's a much broader issue, absolutely, Gene, that we're really sensitized to, particularly given some of what's going on, in the surrounding communities. So I think generally I absolutely agree. And I'm not sure how that applies particularly to Grove Street, but I don't know what that sort of process is. Dennis or Joe, do you guys know if we were to do that, what the impact or implications would be, or how that needs to be considered?
So here in Massachusetts, the Department of Transportation determines whether or not bridges have restrictions for weight limits. It's all of the bridges that you see when you travel through Massachusetts that have weight limit signs on them were imposed by the state. They actually send me forms when in fact, they just recently had me change one of the bridges in town, the weight limits on it. And it came from a form certified from them instructing me to change the sign. So they're the ones that impose it. Roads, we have a little more leniency. And this is where I think the chairman was alluding to with economic development, where in Massachusetts, we have the ability to designate certain roads as not being truck routes, provided we meet certain criteria. And that criteria is long, and I don't pretend to know all of it. But it includes such things as alternate routes that are reasonable, that the trucks can take to stay off certain roads. So that might be something we look at for Grove Street. But I don't know that the bridge specifically would be the mechanism to get the trucks off there.
Yeah.
Make sense?
No, that makes sense to me, Gene.
Just curious as if it's, is it tied to state funding? So if we designate, if we do box culvert type prefabricated bridges, pre-stressed concrete, whether the state dictates, because we're taking state money, we need to meet DOT specifications, or if it's town funded, we meet our own criteria that we set for the consulting engineer.
So part of our permitting process, Gene, is Chapter 85, which is MassDOT. And MassDOT's bridge team has their own set of specifications that our engineers have to meet to build that bridge. And there's no question about it.
Mm-hmm. I just wondered funding. I was making the linkage between funding. I knew that, we'd have to meet the specification, whatever MassDOT sets for an engineering standard, we have to meet. I'm just wondering about, the weight limits being tied to, the state funding mechanism that we're using to get, to get funding for the bridge to offset some of the costs. But that program is federal, isn't it? The ARPA program is federal, not state.
I don't think either one of those things is correlated with whether or not we can put a weight limit on the bridge, whether we fund it locally or we use state or federal funds to build the bridge. It sounds like it's a MassDOT requirement in terms of the weight limits on the bridges. It's not tied to the funding source.
Well, thank you.
Mr. Flaherty. I don't know, Mr. Flaherty, if you intended to raise your hand or not, but if you did, then...
Okay, you got me now?
I got you now.
All right. My question for Dennis, that when we did Fisk Mill Road, we did the bridge down there in conjunction with Milford. There are no weight signs on that because that's considered it's a culvert as opposed to a bridge. Is the bridge right there that crosses that we're talking about, the brook, Center Brook? Are they calling that a culvert?
No, that's a bridge.
That's a regular bridge?
Yep.
All right.
Has a span greater than 13 feet. It's a bridge. And just so you know, the state can put restrictions on culverts as well.
I know that they did nothing with the Fisk Mill Road Bridge. I guess it's so small you're not going to have, both axles on the bridge at the same time. So
I don't think it required it.
All right.
Great.
That was my question. Thank you, Brett.
Of course. All right. Thank you very much. Maureen, if you don't have any final questions, I will entertain a motion.
Do we need a motion as we've already voted the warrant?
So one of the reasons why I just wanted to pull together the agenda was so that we could give you the numbers in advance and basically ask all these questions. If as a result of getting this information, you want to amend your prior vote to recommend town meeting support the article, can easily do that. I think that the board's vote, because it didn't get into specifics on the funding source, I don't think it necessarily needs amending unless both members feel differently.
Nope, that's fine.
Yeah. Do you
The
want
only
to favor or support of the article as a board?
I mean, I have, so I guess I would have two questions. One, what's the precedent for us adding our support to an article like this, right? Is that something that's typically done on these warrant articles? Whether it is or it isn't, doesn't matter. We can certainly entertain doing it. The other thing I would say is there any time sensitivity to making that decision? Can we do that? You know, we know that the warrant's been, you know, approved. So can we do that at in another meeting? I just would be mindful of the fact that Steve's not here, and I would like to give him the opportunity to go on record if we were to want to do that.
I mean, I believe we can vote to support it up till town meeting, the night of town meeting. So we could vote to support it at any time.
Joe, was your point really about adding that, you know, sort of recommended action to the warrant itself?
No, I think if and actually, thank you for clarifying, you know, sort of ultimately the question. If, and I'm not quite sure as far as the tradition in Upton, in my other towns, board members or boards of selectmen would take a positive vote to recommend support of the article. Currently, we don't have any of those things because we have such a short warrant. And I was figuring that we'd be posting for half an hour before the meeting anyways. Very typically, especially when you have shorter town meetings, board of selectmen, you know, maybe the ones that are making the motion or are speaking on behalf of the article. And I am working on not only motions, but then other things to then send to the board in advance of town meeting. So if that is something that's customarily done, I can easily, you know, include something like that for all of the articles if the board does typically express its support or lack of support for articles.
Yeah, I don't think we've typically done that, Maureen. Is that your recollection?
Okay.
Yes, that was my recollection.
Okay, that helps. So in that case, I think we're probably good for this evening. I just hopefully Steve can either watch this. I know he's got the information. Let's just make sure he has everything he needs over the next couple of days, and make sure he's got, if he has any questions, he's got answers.
So, Joe.
Really? Yes.
The ask is going to be 1.33, right?
Correct.
Yes.
All right.
Very good. Okay, folks, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn the selectmen's meeting of October 25th at 7:33 p.m.
I second the motion. Brett Simus, aye.
Maureen Dwinell, aye.
Motion carries by majority action. Thank you.